This is AA Beyond Belief. Never mind. So that worked really well. AA Beyond Belief, episode 141. And I'm here with my co-host, Angela B., to continue our series through the 12 steps. And in this episode, we'll be discussing the amends steps 8 and 9, where we make amends, where we make a list, I guess, of those we have harmed and became willing to make amends to them all, and then we make direct amends. Angela, how you doing?
Good. How are you, John?
I'm doing fine. Just playing with some new toys here that I thought might improve the podcast. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, it's all fun.
Yep.
So
entertaining, at least.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about steps 8 and 9. And I guess I don't even know where to begin. I guess I can understand there's a need for this. It's almost like you would think that if, any decent person, upon realizing the harm that we had done through our addiction and our drinking, might feel a need to go to those people that we've harmed and try to right those relationships. I do see a need. I know in my particular case, there was a lot of shame attached to the behaviors as I became aware of them. And there were people I was literally afraid to look in the eye. And I needed for my own peace of mind and I guess my own well-being to make those amends. So I kind of did it for myself. I don't know. I always like to kind of start with you because you seem to have had a really good grounding in, working these steps with a sponsor. I did, but with this step, I didn't do a whole lot of prep work, I guess. I knew what I needed to do from the inventory. And I just talked to my sponsor a little bit before and after making the amends. And I really didn't have a lot to do. Most of my amends were over a long period of time by changing behaviors. And I think that had to do with just where I was at in my life at the time.
Yeah, for us, and the way that I've done them is much more, I guess, methodic, like the rest of the steps that I've done. So for step 8 and 9, the alternative 12 steps, a secular guide to recovery book is really good. I think it's probably the best chapters in the book for me, because it really talks about these steps and about how to take a look at what your part is. Like they have a whole section on how to do the homework to do this step. And that's what I usually recommend to people when I'm taking them through the steps, because it really helps you to, ask some questions to help you think about, why am I making, this amends? What is it that I think that I need to do? What exactly was the wrong that I did? And so, to start out, I would just definitely recommend those two sections of it. I think it's only like maybe 5 or 6 pages long, so it's not hard to read and a pretty quick read, but really good and a useful tool for thinking about these steps. So for step 8, my sponsor asked me to make a list. So go back to, the 4th step, like most people do. And not everybody on my 4th step is somebody that I would need to make an amends to, or that I had harmed in some way. But it's a good starting place to get you thinking about, the people that you have harmed and stuff. And then just, think about it, go through, the alternative book and what their suggestions are. And then she suggested that I get a set of index cards and write out what I thought would be an amends to them, what, I thought the best thing would be. And then to be just looking at that until our next meeting, so that, I was thinking about it and not taking it lightly, figuring out, is this the right thing to do or not? And one of the things I liked in this book, I'll read just a little bit because I think it's really helpful. It says, one of the reasons the entire program works so well is that it asks us to think and act. Neither one is enough alone. We need both. When we start truly examining our harmful behavior, our load of guilt threatens to crush us. Guilt is relentless. It's a gift that keeps on giving and giving and giving. In a subtle way, it makes us feel better to feel guilty. Subconsciously, we tell ourselves it's a bad thing to hurt someone else, so we should hurt too. Our own suffering pays for that. Instead of playing the guilt game, we need to take full responsibility for what we've done, make our amends, and let the whole thing go. In this step, we need to acknowledge that we've hurt others and are honestly willing to do something about it. We don't have to like making amends. We don't have to feel good about making them. We don't have to feel ready to do it. We just have to do it. And so I thought that was really interesting to me to read about that. And then it goes on to talk about how, amends are different than just apologizing. To make an amend means, to change our attitude and behaviors and keep them changed. It may mean apologizing, or it's, making an internal commitment, but it's usually changing our attitudes and actions, and that they're unconditional, no strings attached and stuff to them. And so, I think it's a really good section to read to help you understand. Some of the stuff it says too, when you're thinking of steps 8 and 9, is not to have any expectations about the other person's response, whether they'll give us forgiveness or, act out, or, usually when I'm working with somebody, we talk about, how we think they might respond, just so that it helps us be a little less reactionary when they do. So if we've thought of a couple of different things, that they might say or do, then when they do, one of those things, we're less likely to, react in a negative way to what they're saying. We kind of, talk through what that might look like. So that helps a little bit. Sometimes a little role playing on what we think. But writing out the list for me was helpful, because some of the stuff that I think I wanted to do was not necessarily appropriate for the harm that was caused and stuff. And so I needed my sponsor's help to get perspective on what would be a good amends, for the given situation. Who were the people that I really did need to go to and talk to, and who are the ones that were too dangerous for that, or that it would cause more harm, etc. And so I needed the perspective of somebody who'd done this before and been in recovery for longer than me to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah. These steps are a little different than the other steps, because I think this is really the first time that we bring another person from the outside into our step work. Basically, we're actually involving another person, and there's a little escape clause in there, except when to do so would injure them or others. And I think it's wise that they have that, but it's difficult for people, I think, sometimes when they're newly sober, to recognize those situations when they should and shouldn't approach somebody. And I think that if you do have a sponsor or a mentor, or however you want to word it, who has done it before and is familiar with it, it would be really helpful. With me, I had a pretty simple life, I guess, before I got sober, and that I was still in my 20s. I had never been married. I really didn't have a lot of relationships. So most of my interactions with other human beings was either through work or my family. So the amends that I made were twofold. I had some very direct amends where I absolutely had to go to someone's office and sit down and talk to them, just to let them know that in my particular case, I went to the person who fired me from a job for drinking, and I let him know that he was right to fire me, that I appreciate the opportunities he gave me to get help, that I didn't realize how bad of a problem I had, but I do now, and that his decision helped me get the help that I need. And it was a really moving conversation. He was very happy to see me. He was happy to see that I was sober. And the whole reason I did that with him is because I had gotten a job like within a couple of blocks away from where I used to work and where his office was. And I knew that I would see him on the street, and I needed to talk to him, because I was so ashamed of myself for being fired. And it was important. So yeah, after I did that, I would see him regularly when I wanted to go out for lunch or whatever, and I could look him in the eye, and I knew everything was okay. And so, that was an amend I made. I did it for myself. I guess it would have been awful if he would have come back to me and said, "Oh, you were a horrible employee," and all this. But he didn't do that. I'd never really had a bad reaction. I don't know how I would have handled it if I would have had a bad reaction. That's a good point.
Right. Yeah. Those are hard. Yeah, because sometimes people are not in a place where they can. That's where some of the meetings that I guess enjoy, or remind me of my humanness, or when people share about making an amends that didn't go the way that they had hoped, or the person was angry, or it didn't change in any way for that person. And that's difficult to, because part of the reason that we feel guilty is that we have done something, and then you go to try to reconcile or do something like that, and then the person doesn't accept it. You then have to accept the situation as it is. And when you're doing these steps, generally it's in your first year of recovery, and you're not good at accepting things yet. You've just given up the tool that you use to try to accept things. And so it's definitely a process of dealing with that.
I think that the amends where you're most likely to have a negative reaction, or that would be more difficult, are those amends where you were in a relationship with somebody. A sexual romantic relationship probably would be more. I say that not from my own experience, but from talking to people who have been contacted by someone who they did not want to be contacted by. I'll tell you one example. I'll never forget this. I was actually answering the phones for our central office, and a woman called who was so upset because a guy that she dated and broke up with, and told in no uncertain terms never contact her again, contacted her for the purpose of making amends. And she was just, I mean, just hearing her voice, I mean, she was just trembling. She says, "Do you tell people to do this?" And I explained to her, "No, we don't. We do not do this at another person's expense." But obviously, he was somebody who didn't really realize what he did to that other person. Because sometimes the best amend you can make is just to leave the person alone. And I think it's hard to do in relationships like that, because those are tricky.
Yeah, I've had relationships within my family where I had to write a letter and to do an amend, and then say, if you would like to talk about this, how to reach me, and if you don't contact me, then I won't contact. And they didn't, and so I've never spoken to that person again. And it's kind of hard, because in my heart I would really like to have a relationship with that person, but that's not what they would like, and so I have to respect that. And so yeah, it's something that stays with me. I mean, I don't dwell on it usually, but part of my recovery, that was one of the things that yeah, didn't go the way in the amends process that I would have preferred. And so yeah, one of the things that they list in the secular guide here is some suggestions to help us avoid pitfalls for doing this step. And so one, they put, we don't have any expectations about what the other person's response will be. A, don't expect forgiveness. B, don't expect gratitude. C, don't expect acceptance. D, don't expect understanding. E, don't expect reconciliation. F, don't expect the other person to respond with amend of their own. 2, we don't make the amend as a tool of manipulation. A, don't renege on the amend if you don't like the outcome. B, don't make an amend to get someone off your back. C, don't make an amend to buy time. And D, don't make an amend to get someone's praise or attention. 3, we don't look for a quick feel better fix. And 4, we don't think our amend is the most important thing in the other person's life. It's easy to think we're more important to others than we are. And so those are, I think, really helpful. I hear a lot in the meetings when we're talking about this from people who haven't taken all of the steps, that, they want to write a letter or do an amend before they get to this part. And oftentimes it's just they feel so guilty about something. They want to get it done. But, in my mind, until, I've worked through some of the reasons for my thinking and understand that a little bit better, it's not really helpful, because I don't have the ability to not act in that way yet. I may have a slight awareness that, I did wrong in this particular instance with this person, but I don't necessarily know why or how to change that behavior. And so it's fairly likely that I may do it again until I go through the steps and are more aware of myself as a whole.
Yeah, when you think about it, what we actually are doing here is pretty rational, and we're kind of taking the emotion out of the. It's just like the inventory steps. You just kind of look at the facts of what you need to do, why you need to do it, and just take the emotion out, take the expectations out if you can, and then you just do it, and just take what comes. But it takes some preparation, I guess. And for me, it took some time. It took me a couple of years before I made that first amend, actually. And the other amends that I made, actually, there was one. This is something I did after I got sober, and I had to make amends because I thought I was going to drink over it, and it was one well, I was just very dishonest at work. I had this job where I was selling insurance, and it was just kind of a crazy thing. But anyway, but I stole money, and so I couldn't pay it back, and it was a real mess. So I had to go, and I was ready for them to throw the book at me, but I was so bothered by this that I just couldn't live with myself, quite frankly. I couldn't believe it that I gotten into this mess. So I did. I went and made amends, and I said, "This is what I did, and I need to pay you back." I paid him back. I left the job. Things were fine, but I was able to get that. I was able to get that off my chest, and that's where those direct amends I made were specifically to get my. I had to be right with myself. I didn't care in that particular case. If they threw me in jail, I think it would have been worth it. I felt so bad about myself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I get it. Yeah. Particularly, as you continue to live in sobriety, I think it gets more difficult, these steps, because for me, I think I can rationalize a lot more now, because in general, I'm a better person. I'm a fairly decent person. So when I do things that, that fall slightly outside of that, I still can go back on, well, most of the time I do well. Whereas, when I was drinking alcoholically, coming to these steps was a little bit easier, because it was fresher of how much pain and the depth of the pain and stuff that I had felt and caused. And so I think I was more willing to look at it to continue on to stay sober and stuff. Whereas now I feel like it actually hurts a little bit more, because, I try to be a good person. And so when I fall outside of that, it's more painful for me. And so my natural tendency is to avoid or, rationalize whatever it was, so that, I don't have to. But, fortunately, I'm disciplined enough that I generally do. But yeah, it's one of the ones for me that was difficult. It was one of my first ones too, was a friend's mom. And so this was difficult, because when you make an amends, at least the way that I was taught to do it, is that you can't really involve anybody else, so I wouldn't have been able to steal this woman's pills and things like that if my friend wasn't stealing this woman's pills, so it was really, that this person put me in a place to do the same stuff that she was already doing. But, for my amends, I needed to go to this woman and take responsibility for my part. And that was difficult to do. So I really had to write out, how I wanted to do that, and some phrases, some phrasing that I could use, some wording I could use when doing it, depending on, how she might respond, so that I wasn't in the discussion with her bringing her daughter into it as well. And so that was a difficult one, but it really was a good one, in that it turned out, she was very happy that I was, getting sober and doing these things. And she didn't want to talk about the stuff that her daughter did. She didn't want to go to a place where she would have to acknowledge that her daughter, did all of these things and was continuing at that time to do that. So yeah, so it was an interesting one for me to have it be one of my first ones, and be able to get the perspective that not everybody is wanting to, do recovery, and their family members, don't necessarily want to do recovery. And so, negotiating how I can do my recovery in this situation. And so it was really, really a good one.
In my family, the relationship that I probably did the most damage to was the one with my father. He was a good man. He could be an enabler, and sometimes he wasn't, but I definitely, was not good to him. I wasn't a good son. And but he did love me, and it was really painful for him to have to regurgitate the past. He was just happy that I wasn't drinking and that I could hold a job and not get thrown in jail. I think he was just so relieved that he did not want to have to revisit all of my past misdeeds and so forth. And I just sensed that, you know, from him. And so I never actually sat down with him and had a conversation that, you know, Dad, I did this, Dad, I did that, because I just knew. Angela, I think I told this story before, but when I first told him that I was an alcoholic and was going to AA, his reaction was he broke down in tears and he took bottles of booze and started pouring them down the kitchen sink.
Oh,
It tore him up that I had that problem. So for him, he was just happy that I wasn't drinking anymore. So the best amends that I could have made to him was to continue having a good life. And I remember, you know what I used to do when he was alive? I didn't like always visiting him. I mean, I liked to see him, but the thing with my dad is he always wanted me to stay the weekend, you know, and I hated doing that because I was like I was, you know, I had my friends and everything. I want to go see them, but I told myself, you know, I need to be a good son. I need to do something that he wants, and I used to intentionally stay with him on the weekends like that because I knew he wanted to, and that was kind of my way of making amends to him. And I could sit there and talk with him about things and not have problems, not have to need anything from him. And that was the best thing. I mean, so we actually were able to repair that relationship over a period of time. And I consider that amends. I mean, there were times when I would deliberately do something that, you know, without overtly telling him what I was doing, that I knew I was doing because in the past I wouldn't do those things.
right. Yeah, no, I think that's important, and probably what part of this is about is learning to, you know, make amends in our mind and doing stuff for the people that, you know, that we feel badly, that we had harmed or, you know, damaged the relationship in some way, or just not acted in our, you know, most authentic and best self. So
Yeah, and it
yeah,
still
I
works. You
hear you
still
on
feel
that.
better.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, because I'd walk
Yeah.
away feeling a little bit better, saying, "Yeah, you know what? I showed up at Thanksgiving. I should,
Hmm.
you know,
Right.
just stupid little things like that. You know, I showed up at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I sat at the table. I had a conversation. I
Hmm.
was polite.
Right.
You know,
Stuff that regular people should just do, but for
yeah,
us, we're like, look at me, I'm acting like a
yeah,
decent person.
yeah. But in those early days, man, that was a big deal. I mean, those
It
holidays,
is.
yeah. And I just walk away, and said, "Yes, I'm,
Hmm.
you know, I'm not the needy person." That was the thing about me when I was drinking. I was a very
Hmm.
needy person.
Ah. It makes me think of what we read here on the don't make an amend to get someone's praise or attention, and that's, you know, that's a hard one. You know, it's like, please look at me doing better. But yeah, one of the things on here that I had mentioned is they say how to do the homework for this step, and I thought I'd read it because there's 11 questions that they suggest that you ask yourself, and write down, you know, what the answers are so that you're processing what the best way to handle these are. And so it says, here are the guidelines that help us make amends. In using them, it's important to be precise and thorough. We mustn't be vague. We mustn't slide over the hard parts. It helps to write them down. Honesty is crucial. So it suggests writing the person's name and who did we hurt, to making memories of the harm. What exactly do we remember about the situation? 3, feelings about the harm. How did we feel at the time? How do we feel about it now? 4, thoughts about the harm. What did we think at the time? What do we think about it now? 5, motives behind harmful action. Why did we hurt the person that we hurt? 6, what damage did it do? What were the consequences for the other person, for ourselves, and for the relationship? 7, why do we want to make an amend? What are our motives for making it? 8, what specific behavior are we going to commit ourselves to? 9, exactly what are we going to do? When are we going to do it and where? Exactly what are we going to say? When are we going to say it? And 11, what outcome do we want for ourselves in doing the amends? And so, yeah, there's a lot there, but I think when I was writing it down, it was particularly helpful because I could think about the feelings of that were involved, so that when I went to make the amend, I had already processed all of that stuff. So again, it made me less reactive to what a person would say, because I had done the work ahead of time to be thoughtful about what I was doing and why I was doing it. Another thing that my sponsor helped me with was that some of the amends weren't an actual action. They were setting up a boundary, either with the person, either face to face or in writing, or just in our own minds. So there are sometimes some of us that have family members that are either narcissistic or maybe have personality disorders, or other things that makes doing this step difficult or possibly harmful to them, or ourselves. And so setting a boundary of that I'm not going to do this anymore, or I'm not going to behave in this way, or have this type of relationship with you, is what the amends is. So I just had that recently with somebody who is in my sponsorship line, I guess, and yeah, it was a good reminder of that. Sometimes it's not good for us to go and list out all the steps that we had done or harmed with somebody else, if that person is narcissistic and would just use the stuff to harm us more. So one way I thought about this is some people who are not well, and it may not be because they have an alcohol or drug problem. It might be a mental health thing, and then you go and you say all the stuff that you had done in the relationship that you are trying to make amends for, and then they post it to Facebook. If you're in a situation like that, and unfortunately sometimes with some of us, even if it's a romantic relationship, but sometimes it's family members. And so, doing that would not be helpful to either one's sobriety or, improving the relationship with that person. What would be helpful is considering what boundaries you need to have in that relationship, and what ways, you can further those amends in a boundary form. So
It almost sounds like making an amends to yourself, and I've heard people say that before, but
yeah, it really
because
is.
you're protecting yourself.
Well, yeah, and also the other person. I mean, they can't continue to harm you if you have a boundary there. That it's kind of like when we go and we set ourselves up for disappointment, like in the holidays, which is where we're at. Well, we're recording this right now, is a good example of that. Expectations around holidays, like I have to go and stay with my Aunt Susie for a weekend, but she's very narcissistic and drinks a lot and does all of this. But I really feel like, because I had done this during my drinking, that I really need to go stay with her. And then she does something that is harmful to you, and so it's you set yourself up for that, because that's that's who she is, and she's not in recovery. And so another way is, like, how can you spend time with Aunt Susie or show her that you care about her without putting yourself in a situation that would be harmful? And maybe it's just taking her out to lunch, so that you're spending time with Aunt Susie, but it's before the afternoon when she starts drinking, or in a place where there's a time limit, things like that. With some of my friends that are not in recovery, and not necessarily drinking, may have other things that are going on, I would sometimes get resentful about feeling like I needed to spend time with them when I have I'm very busy and important. And so I learned different ways to spend time with different people based on what is best for them in our relationship. So there's some people that I can't spend more than 4 hours with, because I get annoyed or whatever. And so I'll go to a movie with them, or I'll meet people for brunch or coffee, or something like that, so that it's an amount of time that I can concentrate and truly be present with them. And then anything from the past that has been difficult for us doesn't necessarily come up in that amount of time. And so that's helpful for me as a way to continue relationships with people that may not be on the same path of recovery as myself.
I think it's interesting that is put into this step, and it makes total sense too. I've had to do that myself. I call them just, it's not my invention, but toxic relationships that I just for my own good, I just, no matter how hard I try, it's never going to be what I would like that relationship to be. And I think in the case that I'm thinking about right now, it's that the other person is not mentally well. And in the past, when I have tried to have a relationship, it would just cause me stress and anxiety, and it's just not worth it. So it's sad, but I hate that that's that way. But in a way, we have to be in self-preservation mode sometimes too, because we have to live our lives, and sometimes you need to let go of some relationships that don't work, I guess.
Right. Well, and in these couple of steps in the book that I'm referring to, they talk about that a little bit too. And there's a pretty good section on forgiveness, which is a difficult thing for most of us to think about and hard to do. And so it talks both about us learning to forgive others, and some of that is forgiving them for either not accepting our amends, or or the new person that we're trying to become, and how to think about that and start working through that as a way of self-acceptance and personal respect and things like that. So
for me, a lot of the forgiveness came from understanding. And again, I had a very simple life, I think, prior to getting sober. So most of the problems I had were with people that I grew up with in my family,
Yeah. No, I wasn't as young, so I've had stuff
you
built
had
up.
stuff, yeah. I know.
Yeah.
I'd go to meetings. I'd be, if somebody's in their 40s or their 50s, it's like they had divorces, they had family, they had kids. It's like they had a lot of amends to make. And I was like, I was in my 20s, and I really, never been married. I really didn't date a whole lot. I just didn't have a lot to, I had my mom and my dad and whatever.
And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I like this forgiveness section is it speaks about neutral detachment, which is, I think, what the main thing that I found in this step, as far as how other people reacted to my amends or any of that. So the people that didn't accept or disagreed or whatever, trying to get to a spot of a neutral detachment, and forgive both myself and them for their reaction, and just accept it as it is, kind of the letting go type of a thing. And for me, I usually do a forgiveness meditation by Jack Kornfield. It's a really simple one. I think it's only like 7 minutes long, but it's a guided meditation because I can't generally quiet my mind that long by myself. But the way that he talks through it, I find is particularly helpful, because it acknowledges kind of resentment in there for whatever is happening, and that I might not be ready to let it go, but that this is a process of getting myself to that point. And then it also kind of, I guess, gives a not permission, but an acknowledgement that it's okay for me to hurt and to feel sad about, whatever the situation is, or angry or something. And that, not forgiving right away, or just, understanding immediately is okay, that this is a process, and that, I can get there. So it gives me the hope of getting over whatever it is that I'm annoyed about, and gives me that process to be able to do that. So I can see in the future that I can get over this, even if I'm not quite ready to let go of my frustration now. Yeah. And so that this part of the step 9, I guess 8 and 9, made me think of that as well as something that I use when I'm working on this part of, taking responsibility for harms that, I cause, and continue to cause, because we're not perfect.
That's true. That's true. That's very true. Yeah, like I say, I mean, some of my, like that one amend I made was, my early sobriety, So it's like, sometimes it's like, I thought, looking back on it, when I was drinking, my life was such a mess because I would, I'd get arrested and thrown in jail and lose jobs. So just by not drinking, I was no longer getting arrested and losing jobs and so forth. And that kind of gives me this idea that I've changed. And in fact, I really hadn't. those first couple of years, what changed is I wasn't getting arrested and drunk and losing jobs. I was getting a little bit more stable, but my behaviors really needed to change. It took me a while to realize that. I think some people realize it a little quicker. It took me a little while. It took me, gosh, like I say, it wasn't until my 4th year that I got into step 4.
Yeah, and it could be, an age thing as well,
Yeah.
where you're at in life, or, not necessarily age, but, time in life. So, if you're raising kids at a certain time, or if you're in a, going into, more of a professional career, you may have more motivation or awareness of other things.
The way I look at it, that during the first couple of years of my sobriety, it was building the basics. So in other words, I needed to take care of food, shelter, safety, these kinds of basic life things. And it took me a while to get that. I mean, I was struggling. I didn't have really high paying jobs or anything in the first couple of years of sobriety. And it was a rough period. I mean, but it took a while to kind of get that those things squared away. I guess it's kind of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of us. I mean, some people don't fall as far, as quickly. But for me, again, I was in my early 30s, and I still, that's what I needed as well. I just had jobs. I barely could pay rent. I shared it at a meeting recently, and I don't know if I've shared it on here, that people talked about service as being important. And so, I couldn't do very much when, you're newly sober, but someone said, well, you have a car, you can give people rides. And I'm like, great, I'll give people rides. Well, nobody said that it's probably important to have registration and insurance on your car. And so for the first, 2 years, I don't think I had insurance or registration. I hadn't gotten to the part of my life of managing, the basic things, at least in North America, that we find important, like, being responsible for, car insurance and following the rule of law. Those things we're still not quite on board yet.
Oh, I relate. I was totally there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not easy just going from someone who just bounces from job to job and gets out of jail, and oh God, it takes a while.
Right.
It really takes a while.
It does take a while. Yeah. One of the things I also like about this step and kind of writing some stuff out is you get to things that you probably wouldn't if you were, just on your own, thinking about who you need to make amends to. Because generally, I think when I first started, it was people who had reacted to my harm or had, something that it was very obvious that I had harmed them. But the lying by omission type stuff is a little bit more difficult and often hidden underneath some of these other things. But it's still, for me, something really important that I have to examine, because my tendency is to avoid, that's my baseline. Whenever there's anything that's somewhat scary or uncomfortable, is I'll usually try to avoid. So oftentimes I'll think, if something comes up or somebody, rubs me the wrong way, or some sort of thing that I may not be able to put a label on immediately, is to ignore, avoid that, rather than, identify what's going on. And so oftentimes I've found myself in lying, or not sharing a full truth because of the situation, out of fear or something. So when I looked at this originally, and then now, those are some of the things that I think eat away at me, or have eaten away at me, tiny resentments or things that I can't fully accept myself, or say that, I fully respect myself, because those little things are in there. So, looking at where we're lying by omission, not sharing something with somebody, I think is important too. And so in this step, some of the times we're thinking about that this person didn't know, certain things we did. So we need to share with them all of those things. And like you said, with your father, it wasn't necessarily true for him, but with other people, it might be, and so looking at yourself first of, am I lying by omission on this, and sometimes it's in friendship. It's, you're friends with somebody that, maybe you were friends with them to get to something, and you need to be honest with yourself on that. And so, in this book, they also talk about where we hurt ourselves. And so I think that's, what I'm thinking of along those lines is, where did I hurt myself by either, not being honest, lying by omission, or, trying to smooth over or deny some stuff that, in society may not be a necessary thing that we think about. But, if you look harder at it, then yeah, I didn't share the truth about, such and such, or I wasn't honest about my true motivations of things. And, I need to look at that as well. And
I really like
and
that
it's
book,
not,
the Alternative 12-Step
yeah.
book. Is that where you're reading that from?
Yeah, there's some stuff in the book that, they kind of can go on a more spiritual level that I'm not into, but particularly steps 8 and 9, I think is really some of the heart and soul, I guess, of recovery that has made me feel like I'm moving more in a direction of being the person that I want to be, because it really, has you do some looking at things in a way that I hadn't before. And, and I don't necessarily think of myself as a bad person for that. It was my resources. It's, what I was doing to survive the majority of my life. I was reacting to things and manipulating and doing what I needed to do. But the learning to recognize those things is much more difficult. And I think that steps 8 and 9 for me, and the way that I've done them, got to a deeper part of that. I guess peeled the onion back a little further than I had gotten in previous steps.
Yeah. So what would you recommend for people that are thinking about these steps? I guess first of all, I'm thinking that they need to make sure that they're ready.
Right. Yeah. And I think at least the way that we do them with step 8 is really the readying step. It's making the list and then talking about it.
Oh, that's a good point, Angela.
With somebody, is that like, okay, I'm looking at this because I've had, one of the people that I've sponsored for, I think, 7 years now. This was actually the only sticking point that we ever had going through the steps was on step 8. And it makes us both laugh because it's, essentially making a list. Usually people struggle with 9 or 4 or whatever, but step 8 was difficult for her to actually get to why she, needed to, like, a former relationship, I think, was on it. And it's like, well, why do I need to make amends to this people? This person knew what they were doing, I knew what I was doing, but she needed to what exactly it was, because it was something that was still bothering her. It was a relationship, it was a rift or something that was getting in the way of her continuing to feel better about herself and the life that she wanted to live. So it needed to be addressed, and it was in step 8 that we worked on that.
Well, that's a really good point. The 2 steps, there really is a reason in this particular case that you do have them broken up in 2 parts, because there should be a preparation. There should be that period of time where, yeah, you become willing, but you have a conversation, hopefully, with your sponsor or someone who can let you know if you are indeed ready and should be doing what you're thinking you should be doing.
Right. Yeah, because it in doing that, you're writing it out and you're looking at, why am I doing it? Am I doing it just because I'm feeling uncomfortable and want, somebody to, forgive me so I don't feel uncomfortable? Am I doing it because I'm trying to manipulate a situation? If I tell this person this, then they're, not going to kick me out of their house, or, whatever it is. There are lots of little details in there that can be reasons other than, just your recovery for wanting to do this. And, and that might not necessarily be wrong, but the recognizing, why am I doing this? Is it for me? Is it for them? Is it for both of us? Or is it something else? Is it another, character defect that's popping up that's causing me to feel like I need to make an amends in this way or whatever? So,
well, anything else we should cover about this step?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think you covered like the living amends as far as your relationship with your dad. I think that's one that, at least in early recovery, it took a while for me to to understand that what a living amends is, and where it comes into play, and where it doesn't. Because, my mind would definitely prefer to just say, I'm doing living amends, and not tell anybody anything about my past, or a relationship, just like, okay, that was then and this is now. And and for some people, maybe that
It
is
can
what
be
they need to do
tricky.
at
I mean, because we
first,
can deceive
So
ourselves.
yeah.
Sometimes it's like you can, and I would often wonder sometimes with my dad too. But looking back on it, now, especially now that he's passed, and I was with him when he did, I feel like that was the right thing to do. But yeah, it's like you do question yourself. It's like, damn, am I just avoiding this or what? But I don't think so with him.
Yeah, and again, if you're talking with somebody about it, usually that helps. And sometimes that is what you need to do for a while, particularly for people who are close to us that we did hurt. Just coming to them with an amends, when you've got, a month sober is not likely to get the results both to
That's a
you
really,
and to
really good
them.
point.
And
Sometimes
so,
that there is a timing issue, and just
mhm,
because you're ready, the other person might not be ready. Just hold on to it
yeah,
maybe for a little while until the
yeah.
right time is right, and maybe you can slip it in a conversation or something like that.
Yeah, and that's what nine, I think, is about, of looking at that, of when would this amends be appropriate, and sometimes there's multiple amends that you need to make for a particular person or situation, and sometimes you can do those in different orders, but the big thing is to be able to, I think for me, writing it out was important so that I could see it in a different way. We've talked about on this particular podcast before of that there's a different process that slows your brain down when you're writing things out, so that you can think about it in a different way. So that was really important for it. And then talking with somebody else who's been through this before and what their experience shows on, how to make amends. And yeah, and that should help you decide, when to make amends to who, and what parts, how much of an amends do you make. For me, with a lot of family, it was setting a boundary first. Was the first amends, was that we're not going to have this kind of relationship anymore. I have a good relationship with family now, but growing up, my mom and I had a pretty codependent relationship, and so for me, one of the major things so that I wouldn't continue to develop resentments was to set a boundary that I wasn't going to help her with certain things. And so it took a little while for her to you know to get used to that I wasn't going to be that person in her life anymore. And so now I'm not that person for those situations. She's gotten used to that. Yeah, when she has this issue, she doesn't call me for it. She has other things that she can do. But and then that helps with our relationship, so I don't develop a resentment over it. And yeah, and so that was like the beginning of some of our stuff, was setting a boundary of things that would change in our relationship. And that was really hard for me. This was the way that I was raised, was that I'm supposed to be this person in this person's life, and not doing that didn't feel natural. It felt unpleasant. And I guess this is another thing with this step we should probably mention, is that yeah, it doesn't necessarily feel pleasant. And so it's one of the times that some of us may have felt some relief after 4 through 7, and then we get to this, and it's feelings generally come up again that are unpleasant. And so oftentimes I think I felt like maybe I didn't do the other ones right because I'm not feeling good about this. Shouldn't I feel good about what I'm supposed to do, and not necessarily. Some of the stuff to do amends is unpleasant, both in having to share or say out loud some of the stuff that we did that we're ashamed about and trying to make right. And yeah, and some of it is just not easy. So I don't think that they're easy steps, for sure. And I highly recommend that you work with somebody on it, so that you're able to process what's going on. And so whether that's with a mentor, a sponsor, another friend in recovery, or a counselor, I think it's important, because feelings do come up, and particularly if you're early in recovery still, in your first year, those are a lot of what we're working on, going through and feeling things, and all the holidays, all the steps and stuff. And yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that.
So tell me, do you have alcathons where you live?
We do a couple of places, yeah.
when my wife first heard about an alkathon, she thought that was the funniest thing she ever heard. But,
I know, it is a strange term.
but I speak at one every year at the Paseo group. Well, actually, I've been doing it every year now. This will be my 5th time. I'll be doing that on midnight on the 22nd. I'm looking forward to it. I always record it and I post it. This one will be posted on December 25th. Do you ever speak at those?
I haven't spoke at an alkathon. So the way that they usually go here is not necessarily speakers. Sometimes they'll do speakers, or sometimes they'll intermix it speakers, and sometimes it's just a meeting. And they'll just do back-to-back meetings. Usually on the holidays, or times when it's where we recognize it's more difficult. So New Year's Eve and New Year's and Christmas Eve, Christmas, Thanksgiving, most of the major drinking holidays, we have alkathons. And I've participated in them, like attended a meeting or two. But yeah, I've never spoken at one that had back-to-back
yeah,
speakers.
the only one I ever do is the Paseo groups, and theirs are speakers. And some of them aren't really that well attended. Like I mean, I've gotten some really weird times, like 3:00 in the morning, and I'm like the only guy there, stuff like that.
Right.
But I go because for me, it's like, okay, it's a great chance to do a podcast. I don't care if there's anyone listening or not.
Exactly, I'll get better sound quality. But yeah, and you never know. I mean, there were stuff like that I did when I was in early recovery because, I hadn't the discipline to go to bed at a reasonable time and get up at a reasonable time and stuff. And so, so those were helpful to me, midnight meetings, things like that. Now, if a meeting is, starts at 8 p.m., I feel like that's a little bit late. And, so I really need to meet it, or somebody needs to have me there.
And that's another episode of AA Beyond Belief. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to help out our site and podcast, there's a couple of things you can do. First of all, go over to iTunes and leave us a review, hopefully a favorable one. You can also help out financially with either a recurring or one-time contribution. You can do that by setting up small recurring donations at our Patreon page at patreon.com/AABeyondBelief, or through PayPal at paypal.me/AABeyondBelief. And you can always visit our site, aabeyondbelief.org, and click on the donate button. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back again real soon with another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast.